She walked into the base commissary wearing an old, faded military jacket, sleeves frayed, patches worn thin. A few young officers laughed behind her back, whispering that it looked like something pulled from a thrift bin. She didn't respond. She just kept browsing the shelves, quietly selecting items while ignoring their jokes. What they didn't know was that her silence carried the weight of classified missions no one was allowed to remember. If you enjoy stories of hidden valor and unexpected moments of truth, consider subscribing to join our community. Dawn broke over Fort Braxton with military precision, sunlight spilling across the grounds in orderly formation. The base came alive with the sound of boots on asphalt, vehicles humming to life, and distant cadence calls from morning PT. American flags snapped in the breeze, rising up flagpoles across the installation as another day began. Miranda Reeves moved through this carefully choreographed routine like a ghost, both part of and separate from the military world around her. At 55, she carried herself with the straight-backed posture that had been drilled into her decades ago, though her right leg dragged slightly with each step, a private reminder of costs paid long ago. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a practical bun, her expression neutral as she approached the base commissary. The sliding doors parted with a mechanical sigh. Miranda adjusted the collar of her faded olive-green military jacket, a relic from another lifetime. The sleeves were frayed at the cuffs, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, and the color had long since faded from olive to something closer to khaki in places. She wore it not out of necessity, but from habit and private remembrance. The morning air had carried a chill, and the jacket was the first thing she had reached for. Inside, the commissary bustled with the morning crowd. Young families pushed carts down aisles, retired veterans congregated by the coffee station, and uniformed personnel grabbed breakfast sandwiches and energy drinks on their way to duty. Miranda picked up a red shopping basket and moved deliberately through the store, consulting a neatly folded list from her pocket. She paused in the canned goods section, comparing prices with careful attention. Her fingers, marked by a surgical scar across the right wrist, traced over the labels of soup cans, calculating the best value. Money was tighter these days. The VA benefits that should have sustained her had become entangled in bureaucratic questions about service records that officially did not exist. Two young lieutenants in pressed uniforms rounded the corner into her aisle, their conversation cutting through her concentration. "Did you see the new equipment allocation for field training?" asked the taller one, his lieutenant bars gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Not yet, but Miller says it's the same shortage as last quarter," his companion replied, then stopped short as he noticed Miranda. His eyes flicked to her jacket, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "Speaking of shortages," he murmured, just loud enough to be heard. Miranda continued examining soup cans, her expression unchanged, though her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Must have raided her grandfather's closet," the taller lieutenant said with a smirk. "That thing looks like it survived World War II. "More like Vietnam," the other replied. "Probably found it at the thrift store on discount day." Miranda selected 2 cans of soup and placed them in her basket, then moved down the aisle toward the pasta section. The lieutenants followed, their morning errands apparently forgotten in favor of this new entertainment. As she reached for a box of spaghetti on a high shelf, her jacket sleeve rode up, revealing more of the surgical scar on her wrist. The movement also caused her to wince slightly, her right shoulder protesting the stretch. The physical therapist had warned her that full range of motion might never return, but Miranda had learned to work around limitations long ago. "Think that's from actual service?" the shorter lieutenant whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Or just trying to look the part?" "Hard to tell these days. Remember that guy last month claiming special forces when he couldn't even name the selection process?" Miranda's hand closed around the pasta box, her knuckles whitening briefly before she placed it in her basket. She reached into her inner jacket pocket for her grocery list, and as she did, a faded photograph slipped partially into view before being tucked away again. Only Miranda knew it showed 5 soldiers in desert camo, faces partially obscured by shadows and tactical gear, standing beside a helicopter with markings that had been deliberately obscured before the photo was developed. She continued through the commissary, adding items to her basket while the lieutenants maintained their casual pursuit, their comments growing incrementally bolder as they noted her continued silence. When she stopped at the dairy case, a small group of enlisted personnel entered, laughing among themselves. One of the specialists recognized the lieutenants and offered a quick salute. "Morning, sirs." "At ease," the taller lieutenant said with a wave. Early shopping run? Yes, sir. Brigade coffee mess needed restocking. The lieutenant nodded toward Miranda. What do you think of that vintage fashion statement? The specialist glanced at Miranda's jacket, taking in the faded fabric and worn edges. He grinned, clearly sensing the direction his superior wanted the conversation to go. Very retro, sir. Almost authentic looking. Almost being the key word, the lieutenant said, loud enough now that several other shoppers glanced their way. Miranda closed the dairy case door, a carton of eggs now in her basket. She turned toward the checkout lanes, limping slightly as she changed direction. Long hours standing always aggravated the old injury, though she'd learned to disguise the weakness when necessary. Classic stolen valor prep, the shorter lieutenant said, no longer bothering to lower his voice. Bet she's heading to the VA next to try for benefits. Miranda's destination was indeed the VA office on the other side of the base, though not for the reasons they assumed. The quarterly appeal of her case was scheduled for 11 unquark, another attempt to have her service records partially unsealed so her medical claims could be processed. 3 previous attempts had ended with apologetic rejections from administrators who could not acknowledge operations that officially never happened. As she approached the checkout, the cashier, a retired master sergeant judging by the veteran's cap he wore, noticed her jacket. His eyes lingered for a moment on the faded area above the left breast pocket where a unit patch had once been clearly visible. Now only the ghost of stitching remained, the embroidery worn away by years until only those who knew exactly what to look for might recognize it. The cashier said nothing, though, simply scanning her items with practiced efficiency. Miranda paid in cash, counting out bills carefully from a thin wallet. Have a good day, ma'am, the cashier said as he handed her the receipt. You too, Miranda replied, her voice slightly husky from disuse. They were the first words she had spoken aloud all morning. With her purchases bagged, Miranda headed toward customer service. The quarterly VA appeal required her to verify her address on base, a formality that never seemed to make it permanently into their system. Behind her she could hear the lieutenants had finished their own shopping and were now in line a few registers away. The customer service line moved slowly. Miranda stood patiently, weight shifted to her left leg to ease the pressure on her right. Her mind drifted as she waited, carried back 22 years to another desert morning, the air filled with grit and the smell of aviation fuel. Captain Reeves, extraction window is closing. The voice of her team leader came to her across the decades. We either go now or we don't go at all. The memory dissolved as the customer service representative called, "Next." Miranda stepped forward to the counter where a young woman with a name tag reading Alicia smiled professionally. How can I help you today? Alicia asked. I need to verify my current address for base records, Miranda said, sliding her ID toward the clerk. Of course, Alicia said, typing the information into her computer. Are you active duty or a dependent? Veteran, Miranda answered. I'll need to see your veteran ID card or DD-214, please. Miranda knew this would happen, just as it happened every 3 months. My service records are under special classification. I have a letter from the Department of Defense Records Office. She produced a folder containing several official-looking documents. Alicia looked uncertain, clearly not trained for this exception. I'm sorry, but we need standard documentation. Let me call my supervisor. Behind her, Miranda could hear the lieutenants had finished checking out and were now standing nearby, watching the exchange with obvious interest. Some people will claim anything for a 10% discount, the taller one said, just loud enough to carry to those nearby. Several people chuckled, including one of the customer service representatives at the next counter over. The supervisor arrived, a middle-aged woman with an efficient manner. She examined Miranda's paperwork with a frown. I'm sorry, ma'am, but these documents don't meet our requirements for veteran status verification. We need standard documentation. These are the only documents I'm authorized to carry, Miranda explained, her voice remaining even despite the familiar frustration building behind her calm facade. Then I can't update your information in our system, the supervisor said apologetically. You'll need to contact the VA directly. That's why I'm here, Miranda said. The VA sent me to verify my address with base records before my appointment. The bureaucratic circle was one she had walked many times before. Her service with Spectre Group remained classified at a level that prevented normal documentation, yet the injuries she had sustained required ongoing medical care. Each denial added another layer of frustration to a process that seemed designed to make her give up. Behind her, the lieutenants had drawn a small crowd with their commentary. Classic case, the shorter one was saying to an interested specialist. Wear something that looks military enough to pass a quick glance. Make up some story about classified operations so no one can verify anything. People who do that should be prosecuted, the specialist agreed, casting a judgmental glance toward Miranda. The supervisor handed back Miranda's folder. I'm sorry I can't help you. You might try the main administration building instead. Miranda accepted the folder, tucking it into her jacket's inner pocket. As she did, the edge of a challenge coin briefly became visible, not the mass-produced variety sold in base gift shops, but a rare, specialized design given only to members of units whose existence remained classified. Thank you for your time, Miranda said quietly. She collected her groceries and turned to leave, finding herself facing the small crowd that had gathered. The expressions ranged from outright mockery from the lieutenants to uncomfortable embarrassment from those who sensed they might be witnessing something they didn't fully understand. Miranda straightened her shoulders, the ingrained military bearing asserting itself automatically. She walked toward the exit, maintaining her dignity despite the whispers that followed her. The automatic doors slid open ahead, revealing the bright morning sunlight beyond. The automatic doors slid open, and Miranda found herself face to face with another uniform, this one adorned with 4 stars. General Marcus Harris entered the commissary, flanked by 2 aides, his attention focused on a document in his hands. He was a tall man with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who had spent a lifetime in command. I want those deployment numbers recalculated by this afternoon, he was saying to the aide on his right. The committee needs accurate projections, not best-case scenarios. Yes, sir, the aide replied, making a note on his tablet. Miranda automatically shifted to the side to let them pass, tucking her grocery bags closer to her body, her eyes downcast in the instinctive deference civilians often adopt around high-ranking officers. She had nearly cleared their path when General Harris glanced up from his document, his eyes passing over her in the casual assessment of a security-conscious officer. Then he stopped. His body went rigid, the document in his hand forgotten as his gaze locked onto the nearly invisible patch above Miranda's heart. It was nothing more than a shadow on the fabric now, the embroidery worn away until only the faintest outline remained, a ghost of stitches that had once formed a symbol known to very few. The general's aides continued 2 steps before realizing their commanding officer had stopped. They turned, confused expressions giving way to concern as they observed the general's reaction. The commissary's ambient noise seemed to dim as General Harris handed his document to the nearest aide without taking his eyes off Miranda. Then, with precision that came from decades of service, he snapped to attention and rendered a perfect formal salute. Miranda froze, her grocery bag suddenly heavy in her hands. The salute in civilian settings was against protocol. The recognition it represented was unprecedented. The moment stretched, the general's salute unwavering. Around them, conversations died as military personnel noticed the extraordinary scene unfolding. The lieutenants who had been mocking Miranda moments earlier fell silent, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion. With practiced muscle memory that transcended the years, Miranda carefully transferred her grocery bags to her left hand and returned the salute with perfect military precision, her movements transforming from the cautious motions of a civilian to the crisp certainty of a soldier. Captain Reeves, General Harris said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. Spectre Group, Tehran, 03. It was both a statement and a question, an acknowledgement and a verification. 22 years collapsed between them, compressing time until that night in the Iranian desert felt as immediate as yesterday. Yes, sir, Miranda confirmed, her voice stronger now. The general lowered his salute, and Miranda followed suit. The commissary had gone completely still, all attention focused on the unexpected exchange between a 4-star general and a woman in a worn military jacket. At ease, Captain, the general said, though Miranda held no official rank anymore. Thank you, sir, she replied, decades of military discipline guiding her response. General Harris dismissed his aides with a short gesture. Wait for me outside. His tone made it clear this was not a request to be questioned. The aides exchanged glances but promptly headed for the exit, leaving the general alone with Miranda in the midst of the growing crowd of onlookers. It was your unit that got us out, the general said, his voice quieter now but still clear enough for those nearby to hear. 3 helicopters down, hostiles on all sides. Your team created the extraction corridor that saved 32 of us, including myself. Miranda nodded once, the memories she usually kept carefully contained now surging to the surface. The night operation. The sandstorm that had grounded 3 extraction helicopters. The diplomatic team and their military escorts trapped as Iranian Revolutionary Guard units closed in. The impossible choices made by her 6-person team to create an escape route. That insignia, the general continued, gesturing to the faded area on her jacket, hasn't been authorized for wear since the unit was disbanded. Official records list the extraction as equipment malfunction, recovery successful. The crowd began to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary, a classified operation being acknowledged in public for perhaps the first time. The lieutenants who had been mocking Miranda stood frozen, their faces draining of color as the implications of their earlier behavior became clear. "How many of you made it home from that operation, Captain?" the general asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "3 of us, sir," Miranda said softly. "I'm the last one now." General Harris absorbed this information with a slight tightening around his eyes, the only visible sign of emotion. "Would you join me for coffee, Captain?" He gestured toward the small cafe area in the corner of the commissary. "Of course, sir," Miranda replied. As they moved toward the cafe, the crowd parted silently, respect and curiosity mingling in the wake of the revelation. The lieutenants stood rooted to the spot, mortification evident in their rigid postures. The general and Miranda settled at a small table in the corner, away from most of the onlookers. A young airman working at the cafe counter rushed over to take their order, clearly flustered by the general's presence. "Just coffee, Black," the general said. "The same," Miranda added. When the airman retreated, General Harris leaned forward. "I've often wondered what happened to your team. After the debriefing, everything went into classified files so deep even I couldn't access them anymore." "That was by design, sir," Miranda said. "Spectre Group operated under triple-blind protocols, mission parameters, team composition, even our existence was compartmentalized." "For good reason," the general acknowledged. "That operation prevented a diplomatic catastrophe that could have led to open war." The airman returned with their coffees, setting them down with nervous care before retreating.